views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Hey there, good evening. Nice to see you. It is time for the Bronx Buzz. This is BronxNet's program where we talk to writers and journalists and editors and anybody writing stuff about the borough of the Bronx. And, in our second segment today, we're going to also talk to somebody who writes, but in a different way, an author who wrote a book about kind of the connection between Puerto Ricans and their faith in the borough of the Bronx and go back through some of the history. But to get started, I'm thrilled this evening to welcome back the tech and policy reporter from City and State New York. It is Annie McDonough. Always nice to have you with us, Annie.
Thanks so much for having me, Gary.
Annie has been hot on the trail of the question, maybe a little less of a question at the moment because it's reality, and her headline is New York City Ready to Relax COVID-19 Safety Measures. And she also did much more recently what we know about the future of mask, vaccine, and other COVID mandates in New York City. So let's start with that. The mayor has come out and no masks in schools, no vaccination checks at restaurants are required, and other indoor activities like gyms and venues and like movie theaters and those things. Masks will be still required on public transit and at Broadway theaters and other places. I think the discretion will be up to the proprietors of those places. I could go on and on. The question is and was and probably still is New York City ready for this? And is the mayor doing the right thing? Do you feel secure? Do I feel secure? Does your neighbor feel secure? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. There's two things changing today. The school mask mandate is no longer a mandate for students 5 years and older. And
we should say, by the way, that today we're recording the show Monday. It will not air till Thursday. So we'll be a little bit further into the week when it finally airs. But go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yes, no, thank you. So yeah, that's going away and that's gone away. And the Key to NYC program, which is the requirement that people show proof of vaccine, as you mentioned, at restaurants, bars, theaters, that sort of thing. Mayor Eric Adams announced this last week. And it, provoked a lot of different opinions. New York City is at a low level of community spread right now, according to the CDC's guidelines. Taking into account hospitalizations and cases. Experts are feeling pretty good about the fact that vaccination is high in New York City right now. About 70% of New Yorkers are fully vaccinated. Positive cases under 2%. I think there's consensus that, we're in a good place right now. We've moved beyond the sort of scary period that we were in a few months ago with Omicron. Whether that means we're ready to pull back on measures like masking, like vaccine mandates, I think is a bit more uncertain. Health experts are saying it's good to pull back, to adjust mandates based on the data and be flexible in how we approach COVID policies. But school masking is a controversial subject. It's people's kids, and the vaccine mandate has made a lot of New Yorkers feel safe going to restaurants, going to bars, to theaters.
I'm included. Let's be honest about it. To me, the germ of the COVID thing is something we've never really experienced before. So this is almost like an experiment saying, well, wait a minute, if the numbers do drop, can we still, command what goes on and control infections? If it turns that there's a new variant that we have not dealt with before, batten down the hatches because it's going to happen again. Certainly we're all hoping that, it will pass to some degree. But then the second part of it was what you're talking about with schools. That is really a big question because 0 to 5, the little kids, maybe who need to get rid of their masks first, are the ones who are going to get rid of it last because there's no vaccine for them. I was in a classroom in a school a little while back, and everybody was masked, and I was like, oh goodness, I sympathy for the teacher. So hard to learn that way. It's hard to tell what we ought to do next. We were just talking before about the chancellor and the whole notion of virtual learning and kids learning outside. Do you think this is going to be kind of part of the school day in the long run? As we go on, and you wrote about that as well.
Yeah, I mean, so Schools Chancellor David Banks has talked about expanding remote learning, virtual learning options, and interestingly, not just as a COVID safety measure, not just as a health and safety imperative, but as a way to reach kids who have trouble getting to school, kids who are taking on jobs, who during the pandemic have taken on a job during the day and are providing, some financial contribution to their family now. This is sort of very early in the works, but both the unions and the Chancellor David Banks are interested in expanding virtual options for some classes, all classes, not just as a pandemic measure. The thing with closing schools during the pandemic is it's one of those measures that no one really wants to take unless things are really bad. Right. We know how hard remote learning is for the vast majority of students, how poor internet access still is for a lot of people. And so it's one of those, I think, last, resort measures.
And it has so many trickle down effects, whether it be the effect on the MTA and transit, parents who have to go to work. It's just a monumental question. I guess it goes back to the whole notion of living with a COVID, so to speak. But just back to the schools thing. It's bad for kids, and now we're getting all these reports on psychological issues. Kids don't, they imagine what the teacher's face looks like because they've never seen it. And I will tell you, as far as the virtual learning, say goodbye to snow days. I mean, that's
right. That's exactly right.
Why worry about a snow day? Of course, then we get into, do all the kids have hardware that they can use, et cetera, et cetera. What about the notion of laying off workers? Now, the city laid off 1,400. It's only less 1%, as I understand, of the municipal workforce. Are they going to still go there, do you think, and say, because wearing a mask and vaccine mandates are really two different things. What are your thoughts about that?
So what the mayor has said so far is, that's a good point. This week, what's changing is the key to NYC program, the proof of vaccine requirement, and school mask mandates. It's not all systems go. The employer vaccine mandate is still in place. As you mentioned, the mask mandate is still in place on transportation, public transportation. So that employer mandate for private sector workers working in person, and as you mentioned, for municipal workers, is still very much in place. And those layoffs are happening. And the mayor has said that has nothing to do with what's happening, with the changes happening this week. Obviously, they're related, but that there's not a change happening on that front.
Are they going to do another go around and review and lay off some more workers? That would be interesting to me if they were.
Yeah, I think that that depends on whether they start to require in the future things like boosters and sort of up-to-date vaccinations.
That's right.
So they've sort of done the review, I think.
Listen, the numbers, I got to tell you, I'm proud of being a New Yorker. The numbers are fantastic. I mean, let's see, 77% overall, 87% of adults are fully vaccinated. That is very impressive, although the booster numbers were significantly lower. I think, I forget what it was, 57% or something like that. Let's talk about if you're a corporation and you're back to work and you feel like, a lot of the corporations have fewer employees, the desks are spread out. In many cases, they put windows in, so people are either in cubicles, and you say, we've really, handled this well. Why do we still have to do it? And then, of course, becomes a political question of our freedom and, and that whole thing. So do we expect a pushback from corporations on these things, or you think they're just going to say, look, let's not fight it, let's move forward?
I guess it's a good question. I think there's almost, we're sort of adjusted almost to
Mhm.
this. It's been in place for a little bit. But it's a good question because you're hearing more these days about the return to the office. I'm hearing a lot of like just anecdotally April start dates in terms of getting back to work.
Yes, we've all heard that.
And
Right, correct.
it's it's empty office buildings,
Right.
downtown, midtown. There's a lot of interest, certainly from Mayor Adams, wants to get people out of their pajamas back into the office.
Right.
So maybe we see more pushback happening when employers start bringing their workers back into their midtown office buildings.
But this, you wrote about this, and the city is moving forward. I think it was Councilman Powers' idea of having color-coded notifications. I don't know if it makes it less or more complicated. Why don't you just, it's like, I forgot
Yeah.
let's see, what I have the colors listed here.
Mhm.
What orange means, I mean, I forgot that. So, by the way, so it's green for low community spread, yellow for medium, orange for high community spread, and red, of course, for very high.
Yeah.
Is that what residents and citizens of New York City really need? In other words, just say low, medium, almost very high.
Right. Right. There must be something visual about it. I don't know,
I
but it was
guess.
also Mayor Adams. He mentioned this a while back as something he would do. I don't know if you remember former Governor Cuomo sort of microcluster zones. That was something that I think people found confusing. A lot of different overlapping
Yeah.
sort of guidance systems here. But this one is actually specifically tied to the CDC's matrix for community level spread. So if it's helpful to think of it that way, I think that, it's not just New York City laying down its own numbers and its own measures. It's tied, the sort of risk level is tied to the CDC. And then the city has, at each of those levels, right now we're in green, low spread. Each of those levels, different steps for both individuals and the government to consider taking, re-implementing things like mask mandate,
I'm only laughing because I heard what you said. I don't know if it makes me more or less confused.
Right.
One quote I pulled out: "Consistency of messaging and metrics is essential," and I
Yeah.
do think that's among the things that stirred people up about the vaccinations, about whether to wear a mask. That the messaging that came from the federal government to the state government all the way down to the mayor, although this governor and mayor get along better than the
Mhm.
last. So I guess that let's use that as the way that we can conclude this dialogue. Let's get good messaging, right? I mean,
Yeah,
that's what we need.
it is. And I mean, this is just a small anecdote, but on Friday when this rolled out, the CDC had some sort of hitch where they were saying the 5 boroughs were at a medium community level spread. And that was an error, I
Oh
believe.
my
And
goodness!
so
See,
that was the messaging
don't
error.
make
Like,
that
these
yeah,
hitches are going to happen. And so you really
yeah,
want to have good messaging
got
on
it.
this and be clear.
Annie, thank you so much. If we want clear messaging, that's what we got to do. We got to check out City and State New York and check out what tech and policy reporter Annie McDonough is writing about, and then we'll get our clear messages. Thank you so much.
Thanks for
We'll
having
take
me.
a short break on the Bronx Buzz. Here's the book I was talking about. You're going to love it. Very, very interesting. We'll have the author on the show in just a moment. Don't go away.